Hello, good afternoon, everybody. We're going to give it another minute or two until everybody gets connected and settled, and then we'll get started. Thanks for joining. We're going to give it just about one more minute, and then we'll go ahead and get started. Okay, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Joywind Ronen, and I'm going to go ahead and kick us off. We're nearing about 40 plus participants, so it looks like most people have gotten on and gotten settled. I want to welcome you all to our very first Story Jam in recognition and celebration of Public Service Awareness Week. Looking out my window here in Washington, D.C., it's a beautiful day. Hopefully it is where you are too. So I especially appreciate you taking the time to sit here in front of Zoom with all of us when you could be out enjoying the day. So thank you. You know, in our day-to-day jobs, we are so often heads down solving problems that we rarely pull up and observe the larger environment around us. And today is one of those rare opportunities. This last year has been a year like no other. For the many of us that call the public sector home, it was hard to balance meeting the unprecedented needs of the American public, of our own teams, and all while juggling our own families, pets, homes, and more. Many of us had to reevaluate, even rebalance. As a small business owner, my partners, Lori, Beth, Chris, and I at Wheelhouse, we had to decide early on how to create a place where our nearly 100 employees could find this balance together. We launched a wellness program and we convened weekly sessions to connect and to support each other. And as we came into this new year with a new vaccine, new leadership in government agencies, and a belief that the pandemic would soon lift, we began to look outward and to ask what others are doing and how we can help turn these individual experiences into a real movement. And this is the inspiration behind Stories of Change. We wanted to sound the bell for a collective pause, so to speak, to ask the leaders we admire, some of whom are here on this call with us today, to share their experiences. We asked them, what did you face? Are there things you learned that you want to take forward? And what are you hopeful about for the future? Because we know as a community of change agents that it is the possibility of a better future that keeps us all moving forward. And we are ever so glad we asked. We received dozens of stories from many of you here today. It's a treasure trove of wisdom to help us learn how to become better at change. The stories are full of insights, wisdom, and lessons learned. Some were funny, some were sad, even a few scary ones in there, but they were all meant to be shared, which brings us to why we are here. We have invited some of our favorite leaders to come and tell us sampling of these stories today. It is our hope that by sharing them, we can process this last year together while becoming collectively better at change. So before I turn things over to our first storyteller, I have a few necessary logistics here. I want to let you know that we have live captioning available for anybody who'd like to access it. Also, all attendees have the ability to chat, and you can ask questions, share thoughts, ask for assistance. That is available to everybody. But I did want to let you know that the session and the chat log are being recorded so we can share this session event with others. Hopefully that'll encourage everyone to behave. But seriously, this is meant to be fun and informal. So to get us started, I want to introduce Dennis Watkins. Last year, when we moved our company holiday party virtual, Dennis performed for us, and he truly amazed our team with his magic show. So I'm so excited to have him here today. Dennis is a third-generation magician. He's an actor and entertainer with awards and honors from the Society of American Magicians, the Desert Magic Seminar, and the International Brotherhood of Magicians. I don't know much about any of those groups, but if they hold a conference, That is where I want to be after this pandemic lifts. So please put me on your invite list, Dennis. He's critically acclaimed, has an award-winning show, The Magic Parlor, that's been running at the legendary Palmer House Hotel in Chicago for more than 10 years. And he was recently featured on Penn and Teller's TV show called Fool Us. And just as cool, Dennis has his very own unique story of change that I'd like to ask him to share today. Dennis?
Thank you, and thank you so very much for having me. I'm thrilled to be here with all of you, and I'm really happy to share what I think probably a rather unique little story of change. I run a company called the Chicago Magic Company, which sounds like much more than it is. My company basically produces my work, and prior to the pandemic, that work existed in two silos. I perform and provide magical entertainment for corporate events and organizational events all over the world. And I have been running a show called The Magic Parlor at the Palmer House Hotel in the heart of downtown Chicago for about 10 years. Between those two silos of work, my little team has executed about 400 live performances each and every year for a long, long time. And leading up to the pandemic, my work was already in a great deal of flux. I sort of made a gamble as a small business owner who had just had a new child and wanted to get off the road and spend more time at home. And I went all in on producing the show, The Magic Parlor at the Palmer House. And in doing so, I bought out my previous business partner, my co-producer, in December of 2019, meaning a great deal of my capital was tossed out onto the table, and I was getting ready to recoup all of that when, lo and behold, on March 14th, the pandemic forced me to shut down in-person performances in every area of work that I execute. At that time, of course, like I imagine most of you, we anticipated a rather short hiatus, but regardless of how short it was going to be, I had to keep working. Not only did I have a new child in my home, we had just gone all in. We made some massive investments. We bought out our partner and we needed to recoup. And so stopping just wasn't an option. I'm a third-generation magician. For as long as I can remember, my work and the other magicians in my family, our work had to be live. There are a lot of magicians who work on TV, who work in multimedia areas. I have never been one of them. All of my work, 400 shows a year, is live and in the same room with the audience. But I sat down with my team and said, hey, what do we do? And the suggestion was made to jump into the world of virtual programming and live streaming. And like a fool, I said, sure, schedule a live stream. We'll do it in 2 weeks. This is not the way that you should do these things, I learned very quickly, because it's easy to live stream from Dad's basement about video games if you have a cell phone and a Facebook account. What's hard is producing a show. At the time that we started, I figured it was going to be much simpler than I wanted it to be, but I did have two goals for the team: to create an interactive experience and to create a professional grade product. And on April 15th, we launched our first virtual performance for Hewlett-Packard as a corporate event. And I have to say that we made a valiant effort at checking both of those boxes, but we didn't quite do it. Part of that was because as an artist, I didn't yet understand what needed to happen to make sure that things could feel magical across the screen. And part of it is because as a technician, I did not know everything that it would take to perform virtually. At the time, I had an iPad, a couple microphones, and some lights. Now, my studio looks a little bit different. We've executed about 500 virtual events since April of last year, and this is what is required. Let me show you. This is the studio. This is where I see the shows. As I look up here now, I see the gallery view. That's where we keep the audience, so I can keep an eye on you on a big monitor. Beneath that, we have two MacBook Pros, two laptops running the video, an iPad as one of the cameras, another Canon DSLR as a camera, another iPad, an extra monitor here so that I can see the audience, controls, extra lights just to throw some background splash, a green screen for clients who really want it. And as we all know, friends, the technology that makes this possible, which is a technology that would blow my granddad away, really exists right here, right? See, in this little black box, that's the Wi-Fi, that's the internet router, that's what makes it all really happen. And as we come back in, if you'll permit me 1 second just to get situated a little bit. Here we go. And with that, we'll come right back in, right? So that's a peek at what it takes, none of which was ready when the pandemic hit. In fact, what happened in the beginning of April were sleepless nights and becoming great friends with the Best Buy touchless recovery guys, as I would go every 10 minutes for a different cable, for a different microphone. At the end of the day, the team was able to assemble something that took the work from living between us in the same space to a place where now I could work all over the world. The art wasn't ready yet. We had to correct the show. We had to change it from a show that we were doing that was an adaptation of live shows to include material that was engineered to work in this situation. And as we made those changes, that's where our learning really started. Because we figured out the technical part of it. We figured out what we had to do to make sure that we could be seen and heard. We could control the views. We could bring audience members in. We could do all kinds of fun things technically. But what we really started to learn as the pandemic went on was that the basic fundamental need for the work that we do still existed. And it might sound a little full of myself to talk about the work from a need place, but I do believe as a magician, there's a service to the work that I offer. A service that frankly, in my mind, got a little bit lost as I was hustling to take over operation of the show, to buy out my partner, and when the pandemic hit, it was completely lost in the chaos of trying to put the show together. But as I started doing shows for companies and audiences all over the world in this medium, I discovered something really interesting, which is that we put tickets on sale and people would buy tickets and then they would send free tickets to their family all over the world and they would all meet on Zoom for this shared experience. And what I learned was that you guys, I say you guys because you're the ones I'm seeing right now, you guys, an audience, would sure like to see some magic tricks on video. But what you really want is an opportunity to spend time together safely and commune and have a communal experience. That's the basic underlying need to a show that you buy tickets to and come to see in downtown Chicago. And it's the same fundamental need here. And this change that we made to an all new way of working turned out to allow the team to serve that need in ways that we never thought possible. There was a day in December last year where I did a show in Dubai, Singapore, the UK, and then another show in Chicago all in the same day. Audiences all over the world, something that my little bitty business, live entertainment production company could have never accomplished previously. And suddenly we can serve an audience globally with very little expense now that we figured out this nonsense. So the pivot was big, it was different, and it's changed the way I work in all capacities. In a little while, I might be able to share a piece of magic with you that'll be a great illustration of that. But in the last year, I performed 0 in-person shows and 500 virtual shows. My grandfather would not have been able to work had this happened to him. His business would have been closed down. He would have been on a complete hiatus. Luckily, as a magician, I live in a world and a time where the technology is available. And at this point in time, I see a lot of magicians trying to catch up and move into the virtual space. And I'm just grateful that I did it at the beginning. My soul as an artist and a performer has been fed greatly by not only continuing to be able to work, but by finding sort of a new acquaintance, a new connection, a reconnection with the real purpose of the work. So the story of change that I have to share is one about how it happens, not why it happens. It turns out that that has stayed the same. It turns out that that need is just as potent as ever it was. But the way that I work today is an entirely different art, one that someday I hope to be good at.
Thank you so much, Dennis. As a third generation entrepreneur myself, I understand, the pressure of taking something and reinventing it even as times change. So I'm super impressed with the story you shared. So thank you so much. And I really encourage everybody to stick around to the end because Dennis is going to perform one of his legendary tricks. So you won't want to miss that. So now we are going to turn to our next storyteller. So I would like to introduce Judith Sawatsky. Judith is the Assistant Commissioner for the Office of Systems Management at the General Services Administration. Say that 3 times fast. But more than that, she's one of the most outside of the box thinkers I know. She sits really at the heart of government-wide technology modernization initiatives, and she knows those systems inside and out. But she's really always asking these important questions. How will this impact people? How will this impact my team? How will this impact our partnering federal agencies and ultimately the American public? I had the opportunity to work with Judith for 3 years, and I really truly credit her as one of my mentors and favorite public servants. So I am excited to hear your story, Judith, of what you faced this last year, what you learned, and of course, your hopes for the future. And please, as Judith speaks, everyone is welcome to add comments or questions to the chat, and we'll get to those at the end. Take it away, Judith.
Hey, everybody. I really want to thank everyone for inviting me to come speak today. It's very exciting to come, well, talk about yourself and talk about your organization and really be part of Public Service Recognition Week. I have to say this, I work with some of the best public servants in government, and I don't mean just on my team or just at GSA, but across governments. And it feels odd to just say for 1 week, hey, we really appreciate the work that you do, because the team I work with works days, works nights, works weekends to make this mission happen. So I do want to share a little bit of my story. So on March 10th, 2020, I went and I got my hair cut and I got my hair colored and I got my hair straightened. And on March 12th, I had to go in, this is why I did all that, I had to go in to have a new official portrait. They didn't like my previous official portrait and they said, you got to come in. So hence I spent all this money getting my hair done and went and had the official portrait. And on my way out the door, I knew that we were going into some more mandatory telework at that point. And on my way out the door, I packed up a few things, made sure I had my laptop and my notebook, and saw a colleague who was, packing up and going. And then I went to Castle and Elephant in DC, or Elephant Castle, and I had a drink with a colleague and I came home. And I thought, a week or two, we'll be back in the office and everything. So that was sort of my naivete. I know exactly my last moments in the office, getting my picture taken. I had no idea, like any of us, I really had no idea what was going on. And then it became very obvious what was happening with the pandemic. And I don't have an enormous staff. I'd say we're about 70 people. Of feds, but a mission, as Joy Wynn explained, across all of government. So I tried to meet with every single one of these 70 people. I really tried to understand what was going on with them. I tried to reassure them. I tried to share the messages that was coming down from agency leadership. Where are we going? When's it going to happen? What's going on? And really inspire everyone to keep everything going. And we can do this and we can all this. Here's a secret. I don't think I knew what I was doing. I mean, I did it, but I have to tell you, I was petrified. All the while, I was trying to keep it together. I was scared for my own family and friends. I had a house full of young adults who had come home. One and unceremoniously finished his college senior year. One unceremoniously finished his high school year. And I had extracted 2 young adults out of Manhattan in like a military style extraction at the beginning of the pandemic. So, my house was full, the Wi-Fi was being used, nobody knew what was going on. And as a mother, I was trying to reassure my family. As a sibling, I was trying to reassure my family. As a boss, I was trying to reassure my staff about things I didn't know. And so when we talk, I love that Dennis is here, because I'm not sure if what we pulled off was a magic trick or an illusion. But the story is that we did. The team stayed on mission. We run a set of systems that service the entirety of the federal government. They cannot go down. They really cannot go down. We didn't go down. We kept competitions going. We awarded contracts. We made progress. We took 100 people who normally gathered in person to do planning sessions for agile delivery, and we pivoted them to do them online. We kept all of our capacity moving the way that it went to be. here's what I learned. This is what I learned, that while we were more physically distant, we became closer because we came into each other's houses. People saw my children's shoes. I specifically chose a backdrop that allowed people to see who I am. And I specifically gave my staff an opportunity to tell me who they are. And I really got to know them a lot better. And I will tell you, we're not at the end of this. We're still on mandatory telework, but I now have 70 staff members whom I treasure as individuals, less and less just about what they deliver to the mission. And that's made me much richer. So thanks.
Awesome, Judith. Thank you so much. You know, something you and I have talked a little bit about is traditionally in government, we can be somewhat hierarchical, even just our grading system. And so information filters up and we don't always get a view of what's going on. And I think you had a slightly different experience in interacting with your staff, more of a meritocracy. Can you talk a little bit more about that experience?
Yeah, so, you know, I think we all have been through this, you know, the whole thing about where do you sit in a conference room? Remember the generation, whereas if you sat at the top, you know, the front of the table, like a parent at the front of the table. And then we moved to a generation where the power seat was the center of the conference room table, if you remember that. And who sits at the table and who sits behind the principals at the table, who comes into the room first, who comes into the room last, you know, all of those sort of bits. On Zoom or whatever app you're using to convene, there's no conference table. We're all there. And everybody has exactly the same size box and exactly the same volume. And what I did find, I will tell you also, Joy Wynn, is that this has been the advocacy of people who were much more shy to speak up. I have found that teammates who were hesitant to bring their voice to the table are doing so now.
And I know GSA has a tradition of, I think they're called skip level meetings, but you had mentioned that you met with every single person on your team. And how did that change kind of the voices you heard? And how are you thinking about if and when we go back, or what are you going to keep from this experience and take forward, and kind of how you manage and the voices you listen to?
So way beyond the skips, you know, I just basically opened up my calendar and let people sign up for blocks of time. And first of all, I really got to know people that I functionally did not. I only knew what they delivered to the mission. And I found out who, first of all, who was alone. This was really important in a pandemic. I found out who was alone. I found out who was sheltering in place with extended family. I found out who had medical concerns, you know, within the scale and scope of what they wanted to share with me. And I think that allowed me and my leadership team to become much more empathetic leaders and to really deliver to them and be flexible in ways that we wouldn't have if they had not invited me into their home. We've done that now twice. And again, it's open to anybody who wants to do it. Going forward, I don't know what the future of work at GSA or in the federal government's going to look like. I don't know how many days we're coming in or we're not coming in. But going forward, my really big takeaway is to ensure that we really know, and I really know the people I'm working with at an authentic level and not just a product level, as well as bringing those voices to the table. It has enriched our ability to deliver on our mission, not just us as people, and yes, us as a people. And so that's really important to me.
Thank you so much, Judith, for sharing. It really is, you know, I've known you as a leader for a long time, but it's interesting to learn about how you reacted in this really specific time. So thank you for sharing. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to our next speaker, Richard Crispin. Richard is the CEO of Collaborate Up. He's also a senior associate at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. He's also an aspiring public servant, having thrown his hat in for school board elections in the past. I first met Richard when he led the Corporate Responsibility Officers Association some years ago. I just have tremendous respect for him. He works across all of the sectors private, public, civil sectors. And he focuses on some of the most complex and almost always interesting topics that you'll ever encounter, ranging from human trafficking to protecting wildlife. And so I'm really excited to hear the story that he has today and to bring an international perspective to our stories. Richard?
Thanks, Joywind. Wildlife crime. The illegal trade in endangered species has become one of the world's largest black markets, funding criminal syndicates, fueling transnational terrorism, and many scientists now think the spread of zoonotic diseases, including SARS-CoV-2, also known as COVID-19. For the past few years, my firm, Collaborate Up, has worked to accelerate collaboration among conservation organizations, park rangers, law enforcement officials, and local communities in 7 transboundary areas of Southern Africa, places where wildlife ranges across the borders of 2 or more countries. Usually, we do this work in person, face to face. I mean, you have to picture the kinds of people we deal with. These are mostly older men who would far prefer to interact with animals than people, and who fairly frequently find their lives in danger. In fact, when I first started working with one group, I asked them to do a small exercise, fill out a worksheet or help them pitch their ideas to donors. I asked their team leader if he felt up to the task. He looked me dead in the eye and said, "Richard, everyone and everything on this continent is trying to kill me. I think I can handle your little exercise." Suffice it to say, they don't like meetings. They distrust technology, and when they share information, it's need to know. So in the early part of 2020, as we were planning to bring together over 50 of these folks from across all 7 Southern African countries, including senior officials from the American embassies and the national governments, we planned things down to the minute. But in the opening weeks of March, I started to worry. I just returned from a trip to Denmark, and you could feel the anxiety on the airplane. Masks and hand sanitizer started appearing on more and more people. And our client, the U.S. Agency for International Development, had asked us for a contingency plan in case we couldn't meet in person. Then the day before I was due to depart for Botswana, I got a call. The American ambassador to Botswana had just arrived in country and was promptly quarantined. With less than 72 hours, we rotated the entire 5-day conference online. Now, many people have done that now, but back then, we didn't know if people would actually participate. Could they participate? Many of them were literally in the bush. Would the electricity hold up? What about the broadband? And even if they did, would this group of people actually hang with us? Turns out the answer was no, but also yes. The power did hold up for most people, but failed for others. Same with the internet. But surprisingly, this group, most of whom don't like meetings in normal times, stuck with us. Not just for this meeting, but for over a dozen meetings in the past year. Some drove to neighboring villages to find power, or to the tops of mountains to find signal. Some got up in the middle of the night to join from different time zones. We didn't realize in those early days of the pandemic just how much people crave human interaction, how much they needed to hear from their colleagues, because many of them felt they were going blind. That shutdowns meant they couldn't get out into the field. Their internal networks were dwindling or might collapse. And these meetings offered a chance for them to learn and to share, to keep their vital work going. And we've had the privilege of working with these teams in Southern Africa, as well as with other teams in Colombia, Japan, Mexico, Mongolia, Morocco, the Philippines, Thailand, Ukraine, and all across the United States and in over a dozen other countries. And from all those projects, we learned just how fundamental the meeting is to human collaboration. And we learned, because necessity is often the mother of invention, how to make online meetings not just tolerable, but actually in some cases better than in person. I'll give you just one example: crossing the language barrier. In international development, one of the major challenges lies in the fact that you often rely on the people who speak English and who know how to work with major donors like USAID. Simultaneous translation is a nightmare in person. You need to bring in the translators, their equipment, headphones for everyone. It's a mess, wires everywhere. On Zoom, it's a press of a button. We were able to engage people in local languages, and even in sign language in some cases, so much easier than in person. So I have hope. I have hope that as this pandemic ebbs, that we can continue collaborating across borders, cultures, and languages, because these tools have made us not just better meeting facilitators, but better facilitators of collaboration. And with them, we can not only continue, but accelerate the work of saving some of our world's most iconic species. Thank you.
Wow, thank you, Richard. I think during this pandemic, sometimes it's easy to stay so focused on where we are and even focused on the United States. But I think the pandemic has shown us how important it is to think globally. And that story really illustrates kind of how global, what it takes to solve complex problems. So thank you for sharing that story with us. It doesn't look like we have any questions for you right now. I might come back to you in a few minutes, but I'm gonna keep us on time here so that we can get to our next storyteller. Next, I'm gonna turn to Amy Fong. Amy is a statistician at the Department of Labor's Office of Disability Employment Policy, where we've had the opportunity at Wheelhouse to support some really innovative work over there over the past decade to increase the employment of people with disabilities. Amy recently came to DOL from the Department of Transportation through the Presidential Management Fellowship Program. And she is so impressive that they just offered her a permanent job. It's great working with her because she really brings a fresh perspective at the intersection of people and place and transportation to what is otherwise a pretty well-established team. So Amy, we're really glad that you're here today. And I look forward to hearing as you look back over the past year, what did you face and what did you learn?
Thanks. And yeah, so the story that I wanted to share today reaches back a little bit before the pandemic started. So I'll start by saying I'm telling my story today from the traditional territory of the Nacotchtank, Anacostan, and Piscataway peoples, which today we know as Washington, D.C. So when I finished grad school in 2019, I moved to DC from Texas with 3 suitcases to work at the Federal Transit Administration, a sub-agency of the Department of Transportation. I was eager to get to work, and I knew that I didn't know exactly what I'd be doing when I got there, but I just knew that any way I could contribute to the mission of improving public transportation in America's communities would be valuable and rewarding. And it just so happened that when I was coming in, the woman who was managing the tribal transit program, which is exactly what it sounds like, it funds transit services provided by federally recognized tribes. She was on her way out and she had no replacement. So it was only by circumstance that I was given the opportunity to manage this program. And the first thing I did, because I had never really thought about tribal transportation before, was I started introducing myself to people at the department already who had been working with tribes for years to get their advice and their perspectives. And now, even though there are many people in federal government who work with tribes, work in tribal affairs, and work on tribal funding programs, at the Department of Transportation, tribal transportation is a pretty small subset of what the department does. So there weren't that many people to find in the first place. But for each of them, I asked, I'm new, you should know and assume that I don't know what I'm doing. And I want you to tell me what you think is essential for me to do well in this role. And what I overwhelmingly heard was 1, learn the history, 2, understand tribal sovereignty, and 3, know and respect that every single tribe in this country is unique in its culture, history, government structure, and relationship with the US government. So right off the bat, I faced a challenge because 1, I didn't know any of the history, but I knew enough to know that it was filled with injustice and oppression. 2, I had no idea what tribal sovereignty was. And 3, to be honest, I realized that I only held stereotypes about what it's like to be Native American in this country, something about life on reservations. And in fact, I personally believed that my understanding was that Native Americans were a monolithic population group that mostly lived on reservations. And that ignorance that I had never been forced to examine before was hard for me to admit to myself as someone who is Chinese American and have experienced stereotypes about myself too. So right off the bat, my challenge was that I had to change. So I started trying to learn, and I couldn't do the history justice by trying to summarize it all now, but we all have to acknowledge that the history of the federal government with tribes is one of broken treaties, broken promises, genocide, cultural erasure, and assimilation. And that really troubled me, because when you look at the history books, you see these vilifying accounts of military generals, presidents, Supreme Court justices, and so on, who made decisions that today we judge as wrong. But the truth is, a lot of public servants, people like me now, were also complicit in carrying out those policies. And the bright side is, since about the 1970s, that relationship has changed, and the US has begun to affirm the sovereignty of tribal nations or their right to self-governance. But the truth is that the broken trust still exists. I've heard that myself from tribal leaders directly. And that's really intimidating. So you can imagine, as a public servant who is just beginning to grasp this fraught history and this fraught present, I was really afraid of one day looking back and realizing that I would end up doing something, or had done something in my work with tribes, that would also place me on the wrong side of history. And what I realized was that I couldn't be the only one having these fears and thoughts. So like I said, there are a few, but not many people at DOT who work closely with tribes. And we were all spread out, not in the same offices or agencies. But here's what I did. I knew that every regional office had a tribal liaison, someone dedicated to manage tribal grants and relationships in their region. And usually it was only a subset of their total workload. And often they didn't communicate with one another or coordinate. And I realized that, just like for me in headquarters, where I was one of only a few people working on tribal issues, they too were out in our regional offices, probably the only person in that office who worked with tribes as well. So what I wanted to do was simple. I just wanted to connect with and support other people like me in that position of trying to do the right thing and working with tribes. And I want to show them that they had an ally and an accomplice in the headquarters office and in other offices around the country. And my hope was that by doing so, each of us would find the courage and the resilience to advocate for the tribes that we worked with in our offices, even if sometimes we found ourselves being the only ones in the room doing so. So I started having monthly calls with everyone at FTA that worked with tribes, kind of setting up a community of practice. And honestly, these calls were really awkward at first, because I was asking people who didn't really normally talk to each other to start talking to each other. And I did these awkward calls for a year before something changed. After a year, I finally started noticing that people would start saying things like, I have this sticky situation with one of the tribes I work with. I know some of our normal policies and requirements don't apply in the same way because tribes have a unique status in this country. I'm not sure what to do. Has anybody faced something similar? And other people would start to jump in and say, yeah, I have. And when I faced that similar situation, I also didn't know how to handle it in the right way. And we would share our experiences and advice. And also, very interestingly, the truth is sometimes people would say something that was rooted in a stereotype, and then someone else would have the courage to say something about that and correct that. And as a group, we could find that we could embrace that discomfort. And instead of vilifying anybody, we would appreciate that it was an opportunity to bust a myth and an opportunity for change. And so in doing that, what did I learn? I learned that in my colleagues, my federal employee colleagues, when given a space to be vulnerable and to learn from one another, they would take that opportunity and rise to the challenge. And I learned that, it's Public Service Recognition Week. I learned that I worked with incredibly humble, thoughtful, and reflective public servants, and that each of us have that capacity to be vulnerable with one another, especially when someone has the courage to be the first one to admit that they don't know something. And we had some tangible successes too. I don't have time to go through all of the things I'm proud of my coworkers for doing in that time, but I got a lot of coworkers to sign up for tribal consultation trainings, and one regional office even started looking into paying for that training for every single person in their office. I got a colleague from our policy office who was holding a big roundtable that moved virtual because of the pandemic. That was supposed to feature CEOs from transit agencies around the country. She allowed me to invite a tribal leader to present alongside CEOs from San Francisco and New York and so on. And she got to represent rural and tribal transportation. And that was just representation. Here's something interesting. When when I was leaving FTA a few months ago, my former supervisor told me that she really wanted to hire someone with a tribal or Native American background into my role next. And let me just say that would be a fantastic symbol of making room at a table for a voice that has been underrepresented for too long. And so what am I going to take into the future? Well, when I think about the experience of managing the tribal transit program, what I'm most proud of about that time was not any specific thing that I or my colleagues did, but the ongoing practice that we each made out of being vulnerable enough to admit that when it came to working with tribes, we didn't always know what the right or moral thing to do was. And to me, that was huge because I came into that job feeling this pressure to be the expert on something. And I felt paralyzed by the fact that in working with tribes, I was trying to do work for a set of communities and peoples that I didn't share a lived experience with, or could identify with or empathize directly with. All I knew was I didn't want to carry forward that paternalistic or savior type relationship that is all over the history of the US government with tribes. And so here's my takeaway, and I think this is for everyone, but I think it's especially relevant for my colleagues in federal government as our government shifts hard towards acknowledging and addressing the racial and social injustices that are woven into our history, which is to don't be afraid to be vulnerable at work. It's okay to admit when you don't know something, and you'll probably be relieved to find that there are other people who are wondering some of the same things as you. And if you take that leap, you'll probably be rewarded with the opportunity to learn and to grow and to change. Thank you.
Amy, thank you so much. We are so excited to have you as a public servant and just so thankful that you chose this career. You know, we've been talking for a long time about this silver tsunami of retiring folks in government, and we very rarely hear from voices of new leaders, and we're just so excited that you joined, and I can't wait to see all the amazing things that you do at Department of Labor. So thank you for sharing your story and for participating today. Next, I'm going to turn to Ann Shepard. Ann is the Associate Chief Information Officer for User and Network Services of the Internal Revenue Service. She's responsible for leading an organization with over 1,300 employees and providing infrastructure support for one of the world's largest call centers. She is known as a consummate professional whose personal mission it is to deliver the best IT user experience in government, no small feat. We've had the honor of supporting Ann for nearly a decade, and we know that she's a huge proponent of mindfulness and regularly leads meditation sessions with her own employees, and even at a recent IT executive meeting, her peers. So we are excited to hear Ann's story and to learn about her year. Ann?
Thank you so much. Thank you for inviting me. I'm just so moved by Amy's story and her courage, you know. So let me talk a little bit about my story. My story is about change. You know, I lead, as you said, the User and Network Services team, and my team was challenged with deploying Windows 10 to nearly 100,000 users across the IRS in quite an accelerated time frame. And the most daunting aspect of this rollout to this massive number of employees was training. How do we get so many people trained very quickly? There's a culture at the IRS where if an employee runs into a technical issue, they immediately call the help desk. So all of my help desk employees were sitting, shaking in their boots, worried about this onslaught of all these calls coming in, and being proactive and not wanting to be victims of all of this demand. They were thinking through, well, what shall we do? What shall we do? So in typical form, we put together a task force. And of course, the world never stays exactly like you expected. So our deputy commissioner decided that he was going to invest in refreshing another 20 to 40,000 laptops. So in addition to bringing on a new operating system, we also had a refresh activity going on at the same time. Very good for all of the internal employees in the IRS, but those who are in the support capacity knew that it would be a lot of additional work for them. So all the great minds came together to figure out, what are we going to do? So this Tiger team got formed, and we brought in some additional expertise, and we decided that, okay, automation seems like the way to go, and let's leverage the cloud. So fast forward, in July of 2019, we have a new arrival at the IRS. And she'd been talked about for a long time, and her name was Winnie. And after months and months of talking about Winnie, she was finally here. Some people were excited that Winnie was here, while others were quite apprehensive. Winnie was new, she was different, and she definitely meant change was coming. You see, Winnie is a chatbot, and this was the first of her kind at the IRS. And so as the IRS was transitioning to Windows 10, we decided, oh, can we use Winnie to help us answer a lot of common questions about Windows 10? Like, how do I hide my taskbar in Windows 10? I knew how to do it in Windows 7, but how do I do it in Windows 10? And Winnie used natural language processing, so employees could just ask Winnie a question. And if Winnie didn't know the answer, she admitted it and recommended that the user contact the help desk. Well, employees got accustomed to Winnie, and they started asking Winnie all types of questions. In fact, one user asked the Winnie, how old was the IRS commissioner? And so Winnie's knowledge base just grew and grew. And at first, Winnie's coworkers on the help desk were afraid that she was going to take their jobs. And there were rumors that Winnie could actually do all of the work of the agents. And so there was hesitancy, but there were a few brave souls that said, okay, we're going to learn more about this Winnie. And Winnie worked really hard to gain their respect. So in her first 3 months, she answered more than 10,000 questions with an average response time of a little over 1 second. And customer satisfaction ratings went through the roof. So if you think about before Winnie came, there was all this apprehension, and now she's a star. So the harder Winnie worked, the more the service desk agents realized how helpful she was. She answered important questions for sure, but a lot of those were repetitive questions. And the highly skilled human agents still wanted to solve the complicated technology issues for our internal customers. But across the IRS, the culture was changing. Slowly, the culture was changing, and the adoption of automation was really occurring. And it was very subtle, but it was definitely occurring. And lo and behold, the help desk employees decided they wanted to expand automation. So they got together and started to developing use cases so that they could bring more automation on board, so that they could work on more complex issues and really use a lot of the skills that they had been trained for. And, if you look across industry, chatbots are here to stay. You see that, about 62% of consumers say they like using chatbots. And also we're seeing an increase in AI, artificial intelligence, and finding us using technology to do repetitive tasks and using our brains to do things that machines can't do. And so the need for agents was increasing to do more and more complex work. So Winnie started to expand. She expanded to Office 365, to answering Zoom questions. Winnie was definitely earning her keep. She even starred in a video that showed IRS employee what she could do. So we got even the entire employee base engaged in this innovation and thinking about how we can use automation. Even during COVID, she kept at it, helping IRS employees with technology questions where she could. We even used Winnie to ask some pre-screening questions so employees who had to come in the office because of the nature of their work was not portable, they could ask questions before coming in the office so that we could determine the risk and ensure that we had proper PPE or whatever to ensure that they were safe. So Winnie has really upped the ante. She's done a lot. This fiscal year, Winnie has answered more than almost 17,000 questions. She's responded with an average of 45 seconds, and 90% of the employees surveyed say that they'll use Winnie again. So Winnie has done such a good job that even the greatest cynics are asking for more friends like Winnie. So today at the IRS, we're increasing AI and robotics process automation. Our presence there, we're actually even starting to use that technology for taxpayer interaction. Yesterday, in fact, we rolled out a automated IVR with a voice bot with natural language processing that will allow taxpayers to ask questions about the economic impact payments using voice technology. So we're offering our employees also new solutions using Winnie or Winnie-like products for automated password reset, which is one of the areas where they spend a lot of time having to call back. And so now we're allowing our employees to be a lot more productive. So why am I telling you this story about Winnie? First, after a few bumps, our employees now embrace Winnie. What that says is that change is not easy, but when people see the benefit of the change, they lean in and they embrace and they really start to bring forth ideas about how change can benefit the organization. It's important to keep everyone in the loop and assured as we move through change so that people know what's happening. The communication is good. They can share ideas and we can share ideas. So there's transparency and there's full communication. AI and RPA are not to be feared. They're not capable of performing tasks we humans are so uniquely designed for. Government agencies should welcome AI and RPA to achieve cost savings, efficiencies, and enhance customer experience. I know we will succeed at the IRS using automation because of Winnie. Winnie paved the way and really showed us the art of the possible. And so we're on our way to being a strong innovation culture. And Winnie lived happily ever after, the end. But in closing, I would like to express my appreciation to the federal government employees who've joined us today, and to my team who had the courage to change and to be on the forefront of leading change. So during this Public Service Recognition Week, the gratitude of our nation goes to each of you for your dedication, resilience, and loyalty to our country. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anne. I think you really summed that up well. What an interesting story of transformation and change. I know that AI is something that lots of different agencies are looking at, including at GSA. And I know that the culture change and the fear that is experienced is so prevalent, but it sounds like, at least in your case, the proof is in the pudding. So if people can show results, show the return on investment, that people really are open to adopting and adapting. Thank you for sharing your story, Anne. Okay, I feel like we're in the, what's it called, the 7th inning stretch. You know, we've got just a little bit more to go here before we get a little bit of magic. And speaking of magic, I'm gonna turn it over to Larry Goldberg to wrap up our stories. Larry is a longtime collaborator, a friend, and really a personal hero of mine. Larry is head of accessibility at Verizon Media. Something I love about Larry is that he has single-handedly founded more grassroots organizations than almost anybody I know, including Teach Access, XR Access, and Start Access, all with related missions to help ensure that the future is more inclusive. Early in his career, Larry helped pioneer the development of the captioning system for digital television in the US through a grant from none other than our federal government. So every time my family watches a movie, I don't know if this is true with yours, but they all want captioning now. And every time we clamor to turn it on, I say a silent thank you, Larry. We appreciate what you have done to your contribution there that has benefited everybody. So we appreciate you. Thanks, Larry. So let's go ahead and hear your story of change and hear what's going on at Verizon Media.
Thanks, Joy-Wen. I know you invited me here as comic relief, and I'm going to be a great lead-in to Dennis, because you didn't mention I'm also kind of a loose cannon. And
True
I'm going to be, that's my story, and I'm sticking with it. Now, if there are a lot of federal employees listening, I hope I'm not safe for work for you guys. I'll be okay. My story of change, oddly enough, I could go back to that fateful March, but I'll go from now. Just this week, my entire company had a massive change. It's not something we can talk about really yet, but just go ahead and do a web search for Verizon and Verizon Media, and I'll give you a little clue. It's got something to do with that. So look it up, and boy, if there's ever a definition of a period of time with change, this is it. Now, when Joy Wynn posted on LinkedIn that, oh, we're all fearing change, and I was like, no, I love change. Anyone got some spare change? Now, this might just be me, but to me, it's like you have to embrace change because it's going to come, whether you like it or not. It's coming, and if you're not ready or willing to be flexible, and luckily I do work in an industry that kind of thrives on it so much in this tech world, but you have to be ready for change. And, after maybe seeing the light at the end of the tunnel, all of a sudden this big corporate change comes to us. I have to tell you, my team, it's a small team, not substantive like the rest of the folks who are talking. There's only 5 of us, but we do consider everyone at Verizon Media part of the team, and that's 10,000. But my team was like, yeah, we got this. Yeah. Here we go again, and we are going to follow our mission, and having your eyes on the prize, it really helps a lot. And it's helped us through this past year a lot. We are innovating by the minute. Last March, I was in Florida on vacation, not last, the March before. Is it that long ago? And I knew something was up when the Red Sox canceled spring training, because that's what I went down for, not to try out, to attend a game. And they canceled the game, and I thought, oh, this must be serious, because you don't cancel Major League Baseball readily. And within days, we left early, came back, and started watching the world change. Now, oddly enough, because my team and the people I work with are located all over the country, I kind of spend my day doing this. I have for, well, I've been working the company almost 7 years. So I'd sit in front of a monitor and do conference calls. So what's the big deal? What's changing? Well, what's changing is that was in my head. That was not in the head of all the people I was working with who were used to seeing each other, going to the cafeteria. It was such a treat to me when I used to travel and get to actually see people face to face. But they had, and they were changing. And in Verizon Media, we have a lot of technicians, a lot of editorial people. We've got Yahoo News and Yahoo Sports, um, In the Know, all kinds of online media, and a lot of them were live video shows, streaming shows. Well, it was awesome for me to watch how these really heavy high-tech video streams, particularly Yahoo Finance, which streams 8 hours a day, bell to bell, move their studios into the homes and living rooms of their anchors almost seamlessly. And they didn't miss a beat. And it's like, that is the way to react. That was pretty incredible. And off they went, and that's where they've been ever since. Oddly enough, we had just finished building a multi-million-dollar studio in 2 of our locations, and we'll get back to use them again. But there they are doing what Dennis does, wearing plaid pajamas and bunny slippers and delivering the latest Wall Street results. And I think about that every time when I watch them, because we know what's going on behind the scenes. One of the things that has really struck this year is, obviously, along with what we're going through with the pandemic, is the attention to racial justice in this country. And now being in a major for-profit company, seeing how they dealt with that, it was so fascinating. The tech sector hasn't been known for its ability to be diverse and to take in a lot of voices. We've talked about it from time to time. It's like this wave of DEI, but this time it was real, and it was really real. And you really, or at least for some companies that we respect, they had to pay real attention to how they were treating their employees, how they were dealing with their with their customers, um, and then how they're telling the stories to the public. And you want to be authentic. You hear that word over and over again. Well, one of the authentic stories that I got to watch was from Verizon, which is a huge company with a lot of help desks and a lot of people working all day long taking the calls. And there was one blind woman who was working from the office with just this array of technology, assistive technology that blind people use. And as soon as they started shutting down the offices and telling people to work from home, she thought, oh, well, that's it. I'm going to be furloughed. I'm going to be fired. I don't have all this stuff in my house. Well, I think the story is right on the web here. They sent a SWAT team to her house, not really SWAT, a tech team with all the technologies, and they set her up to work from home in a day. She didn't miss a beat. And all of a sudden now she's taking all these user calls at home, and they just were able to accommodate her. Would they have done that previously in having not been exposed to the need to really serve everyone, being fully inclusive? I don't know, but they sure did it this time, and it was really impressive. So 96% of my company now working from home. Um, Verizon doing these house calls now, like your cable's out, your internet's out. They developed a system where they will stand outside your house and call you on the phone and say, all right, go down to your basement, look up in the ceiling. You see that wire? Not the green one, the white one. Okay, disconnect that. And that's how they're doing service calls so that they didn't have to work with people face to face. It's incredible that adaptation. For us, you might have heard the quote, "Never waste a crisis." We just started innovating every single day. Started pulling off stuff that we probably never would have been allowed to do or would have thought about doing. Because we serve people with disabilities so significantly across the map, we started looking at what about online media? What about these calls right now? We're using what, Zoom? They didn't have captioning before all this. Now they do. All the video conference systems now have it, and we're helping innovate around that. We're being resilient. We're showing grit. We're realizing that just because you're sitting in front of the screen, that might be your home and your comfort level, but not what's going on out in the world. And so I'm impressed by how now diversity inclusion is really feeling more dug in. And now we're working, of course, on making sure people realize when you're thinking intersectional, you're thinking about people with disabilities too, which sometimes people forgot, but not anymore.
Awesome, Larry. I really love that notion of never letting a crisis go to waste. I'm curious, when you think about the future and now, companies might be changing, people might be shifting. What are you really excited about in the future? What is you always have something new and exciting that you launch. What's the next thing you're launching, or the next great thing your team is focused on?
Well, it'll be whatever it is, it's going to be something access, since clearly I've found a groove there. I should mention the Start Access program you mentioned, which is big companies are doing much better about making their technologies more accessible. But what about startups? What about little companies? What about the ones that say, oh, I would like to make my new tech accessible maybe after I make my first round of funding, maybe version 2. But Joywin and Wheelhouse and Pete basically joined with the American Association of People with Disabilities and said, no, we have to start first and foremost. We need to listen to each other. The disability community needs to listen to startups and venture capitalists. What's going to trigger, oh, by the way, you see my t-shirt says Born Accessible? What's going to make these new technologies born accessible? And this is a great movement that we're working on together. One of the new ones we're doing is virtual reality accessibility. How are we going to make these immersive environments work for people who can't hear, for people who can't see? It's coming. It's going to be in our lives. It's going to be our workplaces. It's in our schools. And we're working with some of the best technologists, academics, and advocates in this project called XR Access. You can look us up at xraccess.org. Got a major symposium coming up on June 10. Everyone's invited. Go to xraccess.org/symposium to learn more. And we're going to find ways of making things like this. This is the Oculus, the earlier version, donated by Facebook. We gave this to a lot of people with disabilities and said, imagine what you would add to a technology like this so that anyone could use it using haptics, AI, machine learning, automatic speech recognition, and we're doing it, coming up with some very cool stuff.
Larry, that's so awesome. I know that the US government is beginning to use XR extensively, especially the military, both in theater and in training exercises. So, it's not just, the range of people with disabilities include those that are, losing sight as they age, or, veterans that have been wounded in battle. So thank you so much for what you're doing and what you're contributing.
Well,
I'm gonna wrap.
let me
Yep.
just mention, by the way, you want me to say this. The keynote speaker at the XR Access Symposium will be the new Chief Innovation Officer at the U.S. Department of Labor, Chike Agu. I think I pronounced that right. And boy, is that going to be great to see him lead us off.
Awesome. Thank you for the invitation, Larry. So I'm going to close things out here with the formal storytelling portion, and just thank everybody so much for coming, for talking about your work, and just really reminding us that the stories are big, the stories are small. There's big transformation like at IRS. There's small joys like connecting with our staff. For me, this year has really been a year about finding joy in simple pleasures. The return of the cherry blossoms were so special this year. A nice meal with my husband, a kiss from one of my children. A silver lining has definitely been noticing things more, seeing the beauty and even the magic in our daily lives. And speaking of magic, to close out our time together, I'm going to turn this back over to Dennis to prove that even in challenging times, magic does exist, and that really the heart, the core of magic is about human connection. So Dennis, please take it from here.
You bet. Hello again. I just spotlit my screen so that if you're in speaker view, friends, you should be seeing me nice and big. And I want to share a little piece of magic with you now to close this out that I think is a really, stellar example of the way that my work as a third-generation magician has transformed over the last year and changed to be something that allows me to do something that I believe is even more exciting than it would be in person. And this is an adaptation of a classic piece of mentalism called a book test, only it's going to take place over a great deal of distance. I need some help from somebody here. We have the panelists to choose from, so I'm just going to grab one of you and bring you in. How about Ann Shepard? Hello.
Hi, how are you?
I'm well, Ann. How are you?
Good, good.
Great. We're going to try a little bit of long distance mind reading, Ann. Where are you today?
Washington, D.C.
You're in D.C. I'm just outside of Chicago. When I was a kid, I watched my granddad perform his version of this piece. Of course, required people to be in the same room so that they could take a stack of books and dig through them to find different thoughts to read. We're not going to do that because we all have access to a great deal of knowledge and information with us at every moment of every day. Ann, do you have your cell phone with you?
I do.
Would you grab that for me?
I have it handy.
Perfect. And before we do anything else, would you bring the brightness on the display of your cell phone down, let's say to 10 or 15%? If you do that, all it means is that in a minute, if I ask you to show the screen to your camera, it's not going to be too bright for us to read.
It's probably down anyway.
Great.
Okay.
And then, Ann, I just want your help building context around this little experiment. So please open the web browser on your phone. And as you do that, of course, make sure nothing we cannot unsee pops up on the screen.
Okay, let me see if I can find it. Got lots of things on my phone. We just hit a mind blank. That's what my phone just told me.
Oh, it did? Do you have, well, whatever it is, whether it's Google Chrome or Safari or whatever the web
It's
browser.
Safari, but I think that I probably was in another app. I'm messing up your magic here.
That's okay.
Yeah, let's see if I can get out of this. It's stuck up in here. Let's see. I was voting for something earlier today. So it's still not getting out of that app.
No worries, we can try it in a different way, Anne. It just means
Okay.
that, let's try this. Why don't you, are you looking at, can you pull up a web browser window on your computer there? Oh, but you disappear. Oh, what a crime. We don't-
Right, because I'm on an iPad.
Okay, oh, you're on an iPad. Okay, Anne, well, come back to us. Come back to us.
I'm
And
back.
I'm thrilled that you're with us. If your web browser on your phone isn't going to open, then I might swap over and pull someone else from the group here. Is that all
Yeah,
right
it's
with you?
still, yeah, I'm disappointed, but yes.
No sweat. Well, Anne, I will have a private Zoom with you later, and we'll do something even more astounding. In the
Okay,
meantime,
great.
let's try to grab someone else. I think, how about Judith? Hi, Judith. How are you?
I'm great.
Do you have a phone nearby?
I do.
Great. Would you dim the brightness of the display just a minute and then open the web browser?
Web browser open.
Okay, great. I'm going to ask you to do a quick Google search, Judith. This is a 2-word Google search. I'm going to tell you what the words are. The first word is Wikipedia. We all know Wikipedia, right? It is the largest online encyclopedia in the world. Second word, count. C-O-U-N-T. So type those 2 words in, Wikipedia, separate word count, hit search, and then if you would just show the search results that you get to the camera right in front of you. Yeah, you might have to come way up on the camera. Thank you so much for leaning in there. And if you scroll up a little bit so that we can see what we're getting there. Perfect. Great, great. You know what, let's try this. I'm going to give you a web address and just type this into your address bar there. Are you ready? And I think this site gives us a pretty up-to-the-second snapshot of the content we're looking here. It's wiki, W-I-K-I, count, C-O-U-N-T, wikicount.org. That's the site. Type that in, wikicount, oh no, excuse me, .net, wikicount.net. Type that in, hit search, and then let me know when you're there.
I'm there.
You're there. Does it give you a big number?
Yes, sir.
Oh, great. I'm not a math person. I'm going to use a calculator. What's that big number?
6, you want the whole thing?
Oh, yeah, please.
6,293,756.
756. 6,293,756. And does it say that that's the number of articles on Wikipedia?
Articles in the English Wikipedia.
Great. And does it tell you what the average word count per article is?
It does.
What is that number?
1,223.
So times 1,223 equals 7.69 billion words in Wikipedia. That's a lot of words. Does that site, Judith, give you the opportunity to click through? Does it say go to Wikipedia or visit Wikipedia or anything?
Mhm.
Okay, would you do that? Would you click through and tell me if it takes you to the Wikipedia?
It does.
Great. So do you see a search bar and a magnifying glass?
Yeah, I do.
Great, Judith. I want you to click on that, and then I want you to search for something. Anything you might expect to find an article for on Wikipedia. Don't tell me what it is, and don't show the camera. But think person, place, thing, event. Again, anything there might be an article for. Type that in and hit search. And once you've done that, just say done.
Done.
Great. Hold the phone in front of your chest like this. And give a couple giant scrolls just to move to a different place in the article, and then hold it again against your chest. In just a second, I'm going to say go. When I say go, I want you to look at your screen. Wherever you scroll to, whatever text is there, just pick out a word. Any word that's at least 2 syllables. Nothing like I, and, or the, but 2 syllables or more. And make sure it's not what you searched for, but a random word, something different. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Go ahead and do that now. Try to move swiftly as you go, and as soon as you have a word that's at least 2 syllables, say done.
Done.
Oh, that was swift. Okay, good. Close the phone, put it away, we don't need it. So 7.6 billion words on Wikipedia. You searched for something, you scrolled the article, and you picked out a word. This word that you picked out, it's at least a couple syllables, and just to be clear, it's not the same as what you searched for.
Correct.
Perfect. The way that I share this picture-in-picture window is that you're on a monitor that's just outside of the shot. It was part of that tour I showed you of my little home studio a while back. You had a big monitor. If I look into that monitor, Judith, and you look into your camera, it is as though we are looking into each other's eyes.
Oh,
I know. Look into my eyes, Judith. And imagine your word that you pulled out of that article that has been written in the air, floating between us. Can you see it floating in the air between us?
indeed. Yes, I can.
Perfect. Zoom in your mind, just zoom in on that first letter of the word. Say it over and over in your mind, not out loud. Judith, is that an R? No. Okay. Okay. Is there an R in the word? Am I getting an R at all? Okay, but not first. Not first. Okay. Picture that first letter. Sometimes mind reading is more difficult than others. Get me started. What's the first letter?
N,
N, as in Nathan.
correct.
Okay, N. So let's do this. Again, imagine it's floating right here. When I say go, I want you to scan that word from left to right in your mind. Are you ready? Go. Good, Judith. I think I got 8 letters. Are there 8 letters?
So hard. I have to look.
That's okay. Let's try this. I think I got near the end. Is there a U?
Mhm.
And I think, actually, Judith, I got more than one. Is there more than one U in this word?
Correct. There is
Correct?
more than one U.
Okay. There we go. Okay, I think I'm going to go with this. Now, Judith, this is my guess. I wrote it down. I can't change my mind, which means you can tell me, of the 7.6 billion words on Wikipedia, which one did you choose?
Numerous.
Numerous. I got numerous. Well done. Yes, give Judith a round of applause. Judith, that was remarkable. And here's the thing, right? The odds that we could pull this off, Judith, well, we established them at the beginning. They're literally 1 in 7.6 billion. But the odds that we could do what we're about to do, Judith, they are even broader than that, because I asked you to search for something. Anything you could have imagined, you did that. Now, don't tell me what it is, but yes or no, do you remember what it was?
I do.
You do? Okay, good. I want you to picture that, and I want you to look into your camera as though you're looking into my eyes one more time, and I'm just going to say some things. Don't tip me off. Give me your best poker face. I'm going to say person, place, thing, event, person, place, thing, event. This is not a person. But I would say maybe a thing. Does that feel right to you? A thing?
Feels right.
Feels right. Okay. Uh-huh. Okay. I think maybe this might not be a direct hit, and that's okay. Mind reading is not an exact science. So, Judith, you could have thought of anything. Anything in the universe. You thought of one thing. For the first time, what is it?
Television.
Television?
Yes.
I got television. Well done, Judith. Friends, give Judith a round of applause. That's for you, Judith. You are remarkable. Thank you kindly for your help. And friends, thank you very much for joining, for watching, and lending your imagination for a few minutes. Thank you, thank you.
Wow, Dennis, that's the second time I've seen that trick. And now is when I admit that this entire Stories of Change was put together so that I could meet you off camera and understand how you do that trick. And you wouldn't tell me. We're going to have to keep doing these events until I figure it out.
I guess
that was
so.
really amazing. Thank you so much for doing that. And thank you, Anne, and then Judith for being a great volunteer. And thank you everybody for coming and joining and sharing your stories. It really, inspired me to think about, what if we kept these going? What if we shared more stories, around what's happening now and what happens in the future? When we build community and we come together, we learn, we connect, and I just appreciate everybody for sharing their stories. So thank you all for coming. I'm going to give you back a few minutes on this beautiful day. I'd love to see you all soon, hopefully in person and in real life, IRL, as my son says. We will be in touch for some feedback, and I look forward to continuing the conversation. So thank you, everybody, and I hope we left you a little bit better at change. Thanks for coming and enjoy your evening.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.